Neville Goddard's core claim, as implied by the phrase, "I received money when I stopped asking," is not a statement about external technique, but about inner position. In his framework, the act of asking signifies a psychological state of not having. It is the mental registration that a condition is absent and located in a future that has not yet arrived. Receiving, by contrast, is not defined by the arrival of an object or event, but by the assumption that the desired condition is already factually present in consciousness. The shift from asking to receiving is therefore a shift from psychological lack to psychological completion. You are asked, in this model, to observe that the mind cannot simultaneously occupy the state of seeking and the state of having. Neville treats these as mutually exclusive inner positions. One organizes experience around expectation. The other organizes it around fulfillment. The claim is that when the posture of request dissolves, the posture of possession takes its place, and that this internal change precedes any observable outcome. For this model to function, a central assumption must be accepted, that consciousness is primary, and that experience follows from the state consciousness occupies. Neville does not begin with material causation and then add imagination as an influence. He begins with the premise that what you are aware of being, and what you accept as real and feeling, establishes the framework within which events are later interpreted and encountered. Asking implies that fulfillment is external, future, and conditional. It locates completion outside the present moment of awareness. Ceasing to ask means relocating the sense of completion into the present inner state. In this view, the mind does not wait for conditions in order to feel complete. It first adopts completeness and then encounters conditions that correspond. You are invited to notice how often certainty is deferred until evidence appears, and how rarely the inner state of already concluded is allowed to stand without confirmation. The psychological mechanism Neville proposes centers on assumption and feeling as organizers of identity. He does not treat imagination as fantasy or speculation, but as the cognitive capacity through which a state is internally lived as real. Feeling, in this context, is not emotion but the sense of actuality, the quiet conviction that a condition is factually so. When you assume a state, you are not picturing a future possibility. You are occupying a present identity. The mind, once settled into such an identity, begins to interpret experience from within it. Asking persists when the identity of one who does not yet have is maintained. Receiving begins when the identity of one for whom it is already settled is accepted. The mechanism is therefore not request followed by response, but identification followed by perception. Attention plays a critical role in stabilizing this identification. Neville emphasizes discipline not as effortful strain but as consistency of inner reference. The mind habitually returns to what it considers unresolved. Repetition of inner statements, imaginal acts, or quiet acknowledgement of completion is meant to counter this habit by repeatedly placing attention in the state of conclusion. You are asked to observe how easily attention drifts back to checking, evaluating, and waiting. In this framework, such movements reinforce the posture of asking. Sustained attention to the assumed state is what allows it to become the dominant context through which experience is filtered. The discipline is not about forcing belief, but about reducing the oscillation between having and not having so that one position becomes psychologically stable. From this follows Neville's internal logic of causation. If consciousness is the primary field in which reality is organized, then the sequence must be inner state first, perceptual confirmation second. Asking is an inner declaration that the state is not yet established. Assuming is an inner declaration that it is already established. Identity, in this view, precedes circumstance. The model does not claim that events are mechanically produced by thought, but that the structure of experience conforms to the structure of accepted identity. You are encouraged to consider how often external change is treated as the cause of inner certainty, and how rarely inner certainty is treated as the cause of external interpretation. Neville inverts this order. This inversion places his thought within a longer historical pattern. Across philosophical traditions, there is a recurring distinction between petition and assent, between hoping for a condition and acknowledging it as already true. While the language differs, the structure is similar. Fulfillment is treated as an inner conclusion rather than an outer acquisition. Neville frames this not in ethical or spiritual terms, but in cognitive ones. The continuity lies in the observation that human experience is shaped by what is taken as settled. You can recognize how often cultures have emphasized inner sufficiency, acceptance, or completion as foundational states, even when external circumstances lag behind. Perception, in this model, is not neutral reception, but organized interpretation. When the mind occupies the state of asking, it scans for absence, delay, and obstruction. When it occupies the state of having, it interprets events as confirmations or natural progressions of what is already established. This does not require conscious distortion. It follows from the way attention selects and emphasizes information consistent with the assumed state. You are asked to notice how expectation shapes what stands out and what recedes. The question within the model is not whether perception filters reality, but how deeply this filtering participates in what is later called experience. Agency, therefore, is defined as the capacity to choose and maintain an inner position. Neville does not place agency in controlling events directly, but in selecting the standpoint from which events are encountered. To stop asking is, in his terms, to stop identifying as one who lacks, and to identify instead as one for whom the matter is concluded. Responsibility lies in sustaining this identification without constant reference to external validation. You are invited to consider how much of your sense of causation is tied to outer sequences, and how much could be understood as arising from inner stance. The stability of this stance is not presented as effortless. Ceasing to ask removes the familiar cycle of hope and reassurance. It replaces it with a quieter, more exposed form of certainty that stands without immediate proof. Psychologically, this can feel like a suspension between conviction and evidence. The mind must tolerate this interval without reverting to request. In Neville's framework, this tolerance is the condition under which the assumed state remains dominant rather than being displaced by doubt in cognitive stillness. The structure of this system can be observed without adoption or rejection. Asking is seen as a mental posture that organizes experience around absence and future resolution. Receiving is seen as a mental posture that organizes experience around presence and completion. Imagination is understood as the faculty through which a state is internally inhabited, and feeling is the marker of its accepted reality. Attention stabilizes identity. Identity shapes perception, and perception constitutes experience. The sequence forms a closed internal logic. What remains is not an instruction to believe, but a clear view of how, in Neville Goddard's model, the mind moves from request to assumption, from lack to completion, and from waiting to the quiet position of having.